Hello cardboard lovers, it's Cardboard Badger here. I hope you're doing well, and today we have for you a brand new deck tech with cards from KALDHEIM. Very excited to show you this deck. If you're not 100% sure what on earth you're going to be building, then I hope this video is of some help to you, might give you some ideas. Also, if you happen to want to be playing Tribal, this is basically a Tribal Giant set, and there are loads of cards that are going to make this deck even stronger, and this deck can hit pretty hard. So I hope you enjoy it. If you do so and you want to like, share and subscribe and support the channel, that's fantastic. Thank you in advance. And if you want more Cardboard Badger in your life, if you check the link in the descriptions below, there are places where you'll be able to find us. Anyway, that being said, we will get on with the start of the deck tech, starting off with our 22 creatures. We are starting off with 3 copies of Bonecrusher Giant. For 2 and a red, we have a Giant 4/3, and whenever Bonecrusher Giant becomes the target of a spell, Bonecrusher Giant deals 2 damage to that spell's controller. This is going to be more devastating thanks to some of the other Giants and their abilities. An amazing card, especially because it's going to hurt our opponent if they try and remove it. Also, this is our 3-drop slot. We've got nothing in 1 and 2, so using Stomp, the instant adventure for 1 and a red, will enable us to hopefully shock one of our opponents and get rid of their creature if they happen to be playing something on turn 2. Next, we have 2 copies of Crystalline Giant. For 3 mana, we have a 3/3 giant with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose a kind of counter at random that Crystalline Giant doesn't have on it, from among the following. It's everything. We've got flying, first strike, death touch, hexproof, lifelink, menace, reach, trample, vigilance, and +1/+1 counters. This is really good because we are going to be running something that will enable us, if this dies, to then start putting those different forms of counters onto some of our other giants. I don't mind if this one perishes because it's all about getting as many counters as possible and then distributing them across the giants that we will have later on. So 2 copies of. Next, we have 2 copies of Shatterskull Charger. For 3 mana, 1 red, we have a Giant Warrior, a 4/3. It's got Kicker for 2, and it's got Trample and Haste. If Shatterskull Charger was kicked, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. And at the beginning of your end step, if Shatterskull Charger doesn't have a +1/+1 counter on it, return it to its owner's hand. More than happy for this to happen. You don't even have to attack with it, but it's really important that we can get that down onto the battlefield and then have it come back to our hand, thanks to some of the other giants in the deck. So 2 copies of. We're also playing 1 copy of Bloodline Pretender. For 3 mana, we have a Shapeshifter, a 2/2, and as Bloodline Pretender enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. So we're going to name giants, and whenever another creature of the chosen type enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Bloodline Pretender. So that is why we're happy to have the Shatterskull Charger just come in and then come back again. We don't need to use it as an attacker, but we will enable us to pump up our Bloodline Pretender. Next, we're going to be playing one of the 2 non-giant cards. We have got Heliod, Sun-Crowned, legendary enchantment creature. It is a god, it's 5/5, it's indestructible, an amazing card. And as long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Heliod isn't a creature. When you gain life, you can put a +1/+1 counter on a target creature or enchantment you control, and for 1 and a white, another target creature gains lifelink. That's the important thing. We want to be able to drop Heliod and then use that ability, put it onto one of our rather large giants and gain some life to enable us to stay in the game mid to late. Back to the giants, we are running 2 copies of Basalt Ravager. For 4 mana, 3 and a red, we have a Giant Wizard, a 4/2, with when Basalt Ravager enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to any target, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control that have a creature type in common. So obviously it's basically everything that we've got. If we happen to have 5 down, then we are going to be doing 5 damage to any target. Straight to the face, straight to a creature, an amazing card, and it will get even worse thanks to an ability on another giant that we have coming up shortly. Next, we have got 3 copies of Calamity Bearer. For 4 mana, 2 red, we have got a Giant Berserker, a 3/4, and if a giant source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. So suddenly our amazing Bonecrusher Giant, if it happens to be targeted by an opponent's spell, it's going to do 4 damage to our opponent. Also, we have got the Ravager. That's going to then suddenly come in, and if we happen to have 4 creatures out, it's going to do 8 damage to a creature or player. An amazing, amazing card. You will be able to hit really, really heavy with this. 3 copies of. We're also playing 2 copies of Tectonic Giant. For 4 mana, 2 red, we have an Elemental Giant, a 3/4, and whenever Tectonic Giant attacks or becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, we can choose one of the following. It can deal 3 damage to each opponent. Obviously, if we've got the previous card out, it's going to be 6. Or we can exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them, and until the end of turn, or until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. Next, we have got Luminous Broodmoth. This is the second and final non-giant in the deck. What's better than having giants, but having them come back and having them have flying. For 4 mana, 2 white, we have an insect. It's a 3/4, and whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. This is absolutely fantastic. It will trigger multiple things as the giants come back in. Wonderful card indeed. Up next, we have got 2 copies of Quakebringer. For 5 mana, 3 red, we have got a Giant Berserker, a 5/4 with your opponents can't gain life. Amazing. And at the beginning of your upkeep, Quakebringer deals 2 damage to each opponent. This ability triggers only if Quakebringer is on the battlefield or if Quakebringer is in your graveyard and you control a giant. So in theory, we should have a giant out. If this has perished, it's going to be in the graveyard. It's going to tick away. It's going to do 2 damage each turn. Amazing. And obviously it could possibly be 4 if we happen to have our Calamity Bearer. So amazing card. 2 copies of. Next we have 2 copies of Surtland Flinger. For 5 mana, 3 red, we have a Giant Berserker, 4/6, and whenever the Flinger attacks, you may sacrifice another creature, and when you do, the Flinger deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. If the sacrificed creature was a giant, which it's going to be, then the Flinger will deal twice that much damage instead. So with the counters going on, we got a possibility of moving the counters later on with one of the cards we're going to see. We could have easily a giant that happens to be 10. We could outright destroy our opponent thanks to this Flinger, and even stronger still is if we happen to have our Calamity Bearer out, then it will double it again. So this is absolutely huge. And our final card, we have 1 copy of Realmcloak Giant. So we have a massive board wipe. Cast off for 5 mana, 3 white, destroying all non-giant creatures. And then we've also got a massive giant for 7 mana, 5 white, 7/7 with vigilance. Next we are going to be running through the non-creature spells. We have a total of 18, starting off in the 1-drop slot with the Ozolith. Absolutely love this card and always have done. We have a legendary artifact with whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. And then at the beginning of the combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. So this is really, really important because it will give us the opportunity for our Crystalline Giant to hopefully make a selection of counters. They could be vigilance, it could be anything, but the important thing is we will be able to then put them onto the Ozolith and then distribute those, like I said earlier, onto the most important giant that we've got. Give it lifelink, give it flying, it could be anything. So really important card, but just the 1 copy. Next we have 1 copy of Shadow Spear. For 1 mana we have a legendary artifact and equipment. With equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. Also for 1 mana, permanents your opponent's control lose hexproof and indestructible to the end of turn, and it's got an equip cost of 2. So just making hopefully one of our giants a little bit bigger, but more importantly getting lifelink and trample, hopefully doing some damage and having it double up, also gaining us life so we can survive to the mid to late game. Very important indeed, but just the 1 copy of. And we are also playing 1 copy of Footfall Crater. For 1 mana, 1 red mana, we have an enchantment aura. We can enchant a land and tap it. An enchanted land enables a target creature to gain trample and haste until the end of turn, which is really important because we want to get some of that giant damage through and hopefully have it double. If for some reason we are not going to be doing this and we seriously need a land or something, we got the opportunity to cycle it for 1. We're also playing 3 copies of Pacifism for 2 mana, 1 and a white. We have an enchantment aura. Enchant creature can't attack or block to slow our opponents down. And we are also playing 1 copy of Rally the Ranks for 2 mana, 1 and a white. We have an enchantment with, as Rally the Ranks enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. Next we have got 1 copy of Seize the Spoils for 3 mana, 2 and a red. We have a sorcery with, as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, and then it will enable us to draw 2 cards and create a treasure token, which will enable us to ramp up to our larger giants a little bit quicker and card draw as well. We're also playing 1 copy of Inscription of Abundance for 2 mana, 1 and a green. We have an instant. And also Kicker for 2 and a green. Choose 1, or if this spell was kicked, choose any number instead. We can put 2 +1/+1 counters on a target creature. We can have target creature gain X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures they control, and target creature you control fights a target creature you don't. Amazing card. We can gain life, we can make our giants bigger, we can hopefully attack with our giant and get rid of one of their threats. Wonderful card indeed. We're also playing 1 copy of Heroic Intervention for 2 mana, 1 and a green. We have an instant with permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible to the end of turn, so we can slam in with our giants and hopefully do some trample damage and obviously make sure that they are going to survive. So 1 copy of. Up next we have 2 copies of Cultivate for more mana ramp. We have a 3 mana 2 and a green sorcery with search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards and put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, and then shuffle your library. We're also playing 2 copies of Garruk's Uprising for 3 mana, 2 and a green. We have an enchantment with when Garruk's Uprising enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. It's going to give our creatures trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This works absolutely amazingly with our Shatter Skull Charger because it can come in, it can trigger, and if we don't fight with it and it doesn't have a counter on it, it can come back to our hands. So later in the game we can just keep replaying each turn and filling up our hand, which is a good thing. We're also playing 1 copy of Heliod's Intervention. For X white white we have an instant with choose 1. Destroy X target artifacts and or enchantments, which can be vitally important, but also if we're getting low in our life totals, we have target player gains twice X life. Up next we have 2 copies of Squash. I love this card, and obviously for this deck it is absolutely amazing. For 5 mana, 4 and a red, we have an instant with Squash deals 6 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and this spell costs 3 less to cast if you control a giant, which we will. Amazing card, 6 damage for 2 mana. Amazing. And our final card, we have 1 copy of Bond of Discipline. For 5 mana, 4 and a white, we have a sorcery with tap all creatures your opponents control, and creatures you control gain lifelink until the end of turn. And finally we are going to go for our land base. In total we have 23 lands. We are starting off with 4 copies of Cragcrown Pathway. We're also going to be playing 4 copies of Branchloft Pathway, and of course we're going to be playing 4 copies of Needleverge Pathway as well. In addition to that, we're going to be playing 1 copy of Fabled Passage and 5 mountains and 5 plains. So there we have it. That is the entire deck tech Giant Smash with cards from Kaldheim. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech. If you have done so and you would like to like, share, subscribe and support the channel, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. And all I can say is thank you for watching, and we will see you again soon here on Cardboard Badger.